After you've painted a couple of thousand paintings, then you can begin. Carl Rungius, American wildlife artist. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. I'm on a journey to learn how to paint, and you are invited to join me on that journey. The author Rudyard Kipling exemplifies what this show is about in his poem, 6 Honest Men. There he says, I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. I send them over land and sea, I send them east and west, but after they have worked for me, I give them all a rest. That is the goal of the Artful Painter. It's to share the what, why, when, how, where, and who of painting. As we embark over land or sea, east and west, to learn to paint, there are 2 key things we need to keep in mind as students of the art of painting. 1, learn from those who know. On this show, we will learn from painters who have honed their skills and are willing to share what they have learned with us. And the second thing is practice. Now, this takes place after we have listened to this episode or any other episode of the show. We take time to digest what we learn, and then we start to put down the paint marks on canvas or board. However tentative those first marks are, with practice, they will become more sure. That is what wildlife painter Carl Rungius meant when he said, after you've painted a couple of thousand paintings, then you can begin. So we've got to put the mileage in on laying down brushstrokes on the canvas or boards. In this inaugural episode of The Artful Painter, I turn to one of my mentors and instructors, and that is artist Ralph Oberg. Ralph is an avid mountaineer and wilderness backpacker. Ralph's paintings reflect his deep love of the wilderness and unspoiled nature. If anything, after looking at many of his paintings, there's a predominant theme. You see mountains. I would go so far as to call Ralph a painter of mountains. Now, he paints both outside and in his studio. As a longtime member of Plein Painters of America, he is a gentle and kind teacher to those who want to learn the art of painting. So I'm so happy to have him on this first edition of The Artful Painter. In this conversation, you will hear how Ralph's skills as an artist grew by learning from other accomplished artists. His sense of urgency in preserving the high glaciers whose existence are threatened. The importance of developing a strong work ethic as a painter and the need to always be honing your skills as a painter. He also laments a bit the sportification of plein air painting, but he also shares some of the benefits that he sees in doing so. So it's a nice balanced conversation there. And finally, he talks about it's never too late to learn and enjoy painting, no matter where you are in the stream of life. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. If the adventurer, prolific author, and museum curator, the great Harold McCracken, had lived long enough to add another book in his series of epic Western artist biographies, that included like Frank Tenney Johnson, Frederick Remington, and Charles Russell, I would have no doubt he would have written one about you. Ralph Oberg. Oh. It's good to have you on the show.
You're way too generous, but thank you. That's nice of you. I know that's far from the truth, but I'll accept it as a very nice compliment. Thank you.
Well, I got to wonder what the title of that book would be. Would it be Ralph Oberg, 21st Century Mountain Man and Nature Wildlife Painter, or?
It would be How Not to Run an Art Career.
I know you just came back from a backpacking trip in June, and I think before that you were at the Preta West in Oklahoma.
True. This is kind of my play season for a few months here. I work pretty hard, pretty steady at the easel through late fall, early winter, and all winter to get ready for all my deadlines for shows that happen in the spring, summer, and fall. But but I like to save a few months in the summer to do some of the things I've always loved to do, which is, mountain backcountry travel. I've been a wilderness aficionado all my life. As a kid, I done a lot of mountain wilderness trips, both in groups and on my own, from Arizona to Alaska to Canada and all the mountain states. So it's been my first love. And so I snuck out with another fellow my age. We both turned 68 here recently, old high school buddies, and we've been trying to revive some of our early days. Now we call it the New Country for Old Men Tour.
I love it.
And so we've traded off planning a 4 or 5 day trip each year, and he led me on one that turned out to be 42 miles in 4.5 days. But
you mean hiking 42 miles?
Yes, backpacking, and carrying our camp with us and our food and tents, sleeping bags, but no paints on this one. This is strictly a physical challenge and a get out there and do it sort of thing. And it was really refreshing, and it I always come back realizing I'm not dead yet, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, I do trips like that too, and they're my walkabouts. And, I may not be doing the photography or I may not be doing the painting, but they recharge my batteries in a way. Is that what you find?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. They clear the cobwebs. They give me, get me out of the studio, get rid of that winter's cabin fever, get outdoors and remember why I paint what I paint. And usually I come home with some great photo references I can use. Now, my next trip, starting in a couple of weeks, is going to be a painting trip. This will be when me and 2 other artists, we're going to go up to the Bugaboo Mountains in California, in Western Canada, in British Columbia, and we're going to helicopter up to a location on the border of Bugaboo National Park that will allow us to paint, looking into these wonderful spires and glaciers.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, I'm very charged for that. It's something I've wanted to do for a few years, and we finally got it put together. So I'm that'll be my next little adventure. But this one definitely will be a painting trip, and I expect to come home with some good information from that.
Very nice. How is a Mississippi boy? I assume, if I remember correctly, you said you were born in Mississippi. So how did you find yourselves in the mountains? What drew you to the mountains?
You're one of the few people that know that secret. But anyway,
it's out now.
I know it is. My dad was stationed in Biloxi in 1950 when I was born, and so Mom was down there with him, and when I came along, and then he was almost immediately shipped out to Korea, and Mom went home to Vermont, and so I think I lived in Mississippi for all of about 2 months, and then when Dad came back. He got Mom, and he was stationed in Pensacola, Florida for briefly. And then after that, he was sent to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado, in Aurora, Colorado. And I was 4 years old at that point. And so and they never left. We stayed, and Dad basically said he told the Air Force, I don't care if you make me clean toilets, keep me here. I love this place, and I don't want to leave.
Oh, wow.
And so he was an electronics instructor, radio, TV type stuff, things that I know nothing about. But he also loved the mountains in the West, having come, both of them, from New England. When they got out here, the big wide open spaces and the clear air and the lack of huge cities at the time was very, very enjoyable for him, and we started traveling the West immediately, and every chance we got, we'd be going somewhere to visit all the parks and all the wilderness. And then he built a cabin up in the mountains on a 1 acre that he mortgaged the $600 purchase price, I believe. And so my brother and I got to spend our early days playing around in the mountain forests at 9,000 feet. And so our love of the mountains started early and runs deep.
Very nice. Now, I can't remember the first time I saw your work, Ralph. It's been a long time ago. And I know over time your work has evolved, including your subject matter and your medium that you paint in. And as you look back on your body of work that you've produced over the years, is there anything that has surprised you about the direction your work has taken?
Not a lot, because I think I was pretty clear in where I wanted to go, and I know I had a long ways to go, of course, when I started, because I didn't ever really get a great early education. I left the university after 2 years and started living off of my art at that time, and basically I've never had a job since, but I was also out there practicing my mistakes and really didn't know what I was doing. I was simply copying photographic reference and doing a very detailed dry brush watercolor rendering sort of thing of birds and eventually into animals, but mammals. And, so I spent some very seriously lean years enjoying the freedom of being an artist, but without much in the way of reward other than that. So I became pretty addicted to that freedom and the choice of living the way I wanted to live. And so I had a lot to figure out, but I've been at it now for, 45 years or more. And it's starting to work. And, as far as my direction, again, the wilderness and the mountains, the wildlife, the Western landscape being so dear to my heart, that was always what I wanted to paint. I did, the wildlife was part of it from the beginning. And of course, I was interested in pheasant hunting and deer hunting and things when I was a teenager, and that got me out in the country as well. And so I was painting birds, and then I was painting animals, and so there was a change of course. Really, it was probably the more dramatic when I met a man named Don Malik, a bird artist from Denver who worked with the Denver Museum of Natural History. And he also did much of the illustration work for the National Geographic Bird Guide that came out back in those days.
Oh, yes, that was a beautiful book.
It was, and he was a bird specialist that in primarily acrylic paint, but the man understood birds so well, and to have connected with him and spend time with him, we'd go out, driving bird watching through telescopes and doing sketches and learning about the anatomy and watching him paint. All of that was my first brush with professionalism. And because, like I said, I had no real education in art other than what little I got at the university, which, some figure drawing, of course, which was valuable, and some design, but I never really got any painting instruction from anybody that knew how to paint. Some of these instructors were teaching because they couldn't make a living as an artist. So
that was often the case.
So anyway, yeah, and so that was probably a pretty strong turning point, and that was happening in the late 70s. And sadly, Don got sick and died not too long after I knew him. Worked with him, and then I discovered the work of Carl Rungus, which I had been unaware of up until about that time. And of course, Carl is revered by virtually all wildlife artists now as probably one of the best, along with very few others, putting animals in the landscape and creating a work of art. Of course, his work developed from very tight realism to a much more impressionistic thing during his lifetime. And I can say that my techniques have developed in a similar fashion, from the dry brush watercolor to acrylics, and then say in the mid '80s, I was going pretty much to full-time oil painting and continue to do that today. But then the development of my techniques has been because of the wonderful workshops I was able to take with many of my peers that are well recognized and artists that I admired, and the list is pretty long. And I was very fortunate to study with some of the greats of today in the plein air tradition, and that was such an important part of it. Rungus's statement to a student who showed him 100 small paintings, "Oh, I've been working so hard. Would you look at my work?" And Carl looked at him and said, "Well, come back after you've done 1,000." And Carl, of course, was a huge aficionado of the plein air reference work, where he would go out in the mountains, which suited me just fine, and he would paint on location. He would back out there into the wilderness for the whole summer, basically, in those days. Horsebacking with the outfitters that he knew. And in those days, he could actually shoot the animals and without much regard for licenses and the seasons. And he would string them up and paint them under natural light and learn their true colors, and just like he would learn the landscape under natural light. So that's sort of when I first discovered that photography is a helpful tool, but it's also a big liar in many ways, and you have to be aware of the difference between what you see and what you paint outdoors and what you see and what you paint indoors from photographs. That was a major shift there. So I was pretty focused on the plein air tradition there for many years, having been brought into the fledgling Plein Air Painters of America group in 94, 3, 6, somewhere in there, mid-90s, when we were the only plein air group wet painting show in the nation. We were the original, and we were doing it on Catalina Island in California, and it was a wonderful experience, because not only did we have a great list of our, artists that when Kevin McPherson took over the presidency of this local group, he turned it national by reaching out and touching a number of us that he felt were going to give the group some power, and it included a lot of guys that I still admire hugely and even have studied with, and I was very fortunate to be included in that group. So anyway, so that got me going. And then, of course, my friendship with many of those painters developed into lifelong, painting pals. So lots of travel, lots of trips, horsebacking, just road tripping, painting outdoors became, a primary focus for almost 20 years. Now I've become a little bit more focused on my studio work at my older age, and I'm trying to develop my techniques in the studio so that they have similar life to what I do outdoors.
It seems like I'm very new at this, so as a naive outside observer, this is what I see. I've been to some, just a handful of local plein air events, and it seems almost like a sport. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's what it seems like. It's a status or a sport. And yet, what I'm hearing is Carl Rungus use plein air not as the end product, but as a means to an end, which would be perhaps a larger studio piece. What's your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right, Carl. That's exactly what's happening and what has happened. In the earlier days, many artists, starting with the French Impressionists, started working outdoors, and they worked directly from life, and they discovered the difference, in about the same time that photography was coming on. But they also got outdoors and got their reference material direct from life, and that's when landscape became colorful, as opposed to the earlier work of the Hudson River and the Corrots and those guys that were kind of studio work that was kind of brown and kind of dark and more imaginary than real. And so that whole tradition has been there for a couple of 100 years. And so the best artists that I could find, in the marketplace today and in the recent past were people that were working outdoors, all the California Impressionists, of course, and then guys like Carl who would go outdoors and do his research. And like you said, these paintings that he did, these little 9 by 11 inch, field studies were some of the most beautiful little landscape studies you could ever ask for. And he would keep them in his studio as his library of reference. And one of my great teachers and friends, Clyde Aspavig, did the exact same thing. He to try to get him to part with a small painting in his early days was pretty tough. And although he did show and sell many, he kept many. And when I was fortunate to house sit for him when I lived in Loveland, Colorado, my wife and I would sit in his church studio there for a day, a week while they go travel to somewhere in the world, and I could paw through his studio library of hundreds and hundreds of these little field studies in plein air that he had done and kept as his library of reference, same as Carl did. And you go to the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, Alberta, and they have his entire studio when he died in Banff, and that includes these stacks and stacks of these small paintings, outdoor paintings that he still had when he died. And that reference of information is more valuable to a studio painter, than making them an end in themselves financially. And this whole thing with the explosion of plein air shows across the country that have, you're right, turned into a reality TV show competition, which is, in my opinion, something that Americans are unfortunately very good at, taking anything and everything and making it a competition. It has been detrimental, I think, to many very talented artists because I think they've short-circuited their process of developing what they might and could do in the studio if they make plein air their end-all, be-all, source of income and activity. It's very fun to go out and paint with your friends, and it's fun to do all that, and I did a lot of it. But, when the Plein Air Painters of America stopped doing the Catalina show, and we started doing museum shows instead, showing plein air next to studio developed work. We sort of dropped out of that wet painting thing, and I did too. And I didn't ever pursue it again. And I look at it with this sort of a jaundiced eye today because there is so much more to what could be done with an artist's career than just chase shows or across the country every week. So, but the upside is that it has certainly provided a very, very ready market for a lot of young artists that are very, very good painters. I mean, some of these guys are exceptionally good outdoor painters, and I admire their skills very much. And these shows, the paintings stay relatively inexpensive, which is good for the collectors, and it's brought a lot of young collectors and small collectors into the marketplace to buy original work at very modest prices. Unfortunately, I think that can be a little bit of a trap if you don't go into the studio and start working on pieces that you can price at a higher rate and develop a reputation that demands a higher price. And so I feel, there's some of these folks in this tour of plein air shows that would do themselves a favor to get in the studio too.
Well, I guess it's like all human endeavors. We have a knack for taking something that's good, and there's some there's some cons and there's some pros, and is finding that balance in between. And
Absolutely. And that's, certainly that's a personal opinion, although it is shared by some of us. But and so it's a two-edged sword. Absolutely. I think it's a great thing that everybody should do for a while, because you need to do that to learn. You got to paint outdoors a lot. And then bring those skills into the studio as well.
I have to admit, it's frightening. It was very frightening to start doing it outdoors for me, because I'm a beginner, and so you know what beginners do. We judge, we judge ourselves, and I don't know. You're just scared to get out there because you know what you're painting is garbage, but you're learning.
I tell you, it's one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do. And when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing either. I mean, I took my first outdoor painting workshop with a man who became a lifelong mentor, Wayne Wolf, who was a 1986 Prix de West Award winner in Oklahoma City at the Prix de West show, and had studied with the great Robert Lockheed himself, and was one of the best plein air painters ever. And Wayne told me, he's the one that told me, you've got to get outdoors and paint, Rob, and paint outside. And so that's really part of the kickoff. And during that workshop in Scottsdale, Arizona in '86, I met Matt Smith, and we became lifelong friends with that meeting, and began painting together and doing. We were both learning at the time and doing what they said you have to do, those miles of canvas, to find your skills and develop your skills, because it's one of the tougher things anybody's ever tried to do who's never done it before. And you're not alone in that feeling, because it is a struggle. And we did so many paintings that were absolute junk before we ever started doing anything that was worthwhile. And it took a lot of years. And so
I think we're under a lot of pressure too in our society, because we live in a time where instant gratification seems to be the norm. I mean, think about the dopamine hits you get when you browse the internet, right? And then there's a poor work ethic. And I'm not trying to make a bad judgment on people, but the work ethic is not the same today, it seems to me, than it was when I was growing up. And as a result, I think we kind of develop these unrealistic expectations in learning the craft of becoming a good artist. At least I know I have.
Well, I think that's partly responsible for this explosion and the plein air shows, is that it's kind of a quick and easy, instant gratification, turn around, make some bucks, move on, and that's all fine and good. I don't have any real problem with that. It's just that, like I said, it can be a trap for some who don't do anything else. That's all. And and I've done, I do a lot of, I love to paint with my friends. I mean, gosh, I don't often go out just by myself. I love to go with somebody else, and they help motivate me. They help, when I paint with, some of the greats out there, it's like they always say, play tennis with somebody a lot better than you, so you'll learn. So
exactly.
Yeah, and every time I do that, it raises my game to stand next to Matt or Clyde or Skip or any of these guys that are so good, Len, Jill, all these people you're just fortunate to meet recently, and these people all raise my game just by being with them. And although I've taken workshops with many of them in my earlier days, now they're my friends, and I get to paint with them, whenever we can. And that in itself is a huge education.
Well, I have to admit there was a strong a sense of camaraderie in the workshop. I'm going to get into that in a minute, because that was my exposure to you personally. And also, before that, I had taken a workshop from Matt Smith. I kind of threw myself in this, even though I said I was totally scared and all this stuff. I figured, well, if I'm going to learn this, I'm going to go to the very best and people that, whose artwork moves me. So I may be the worst student in the class, but doggone it, I'm going to see them firsthand and see what I can learn. And I don't regret that at all.
Carl, you and I are very similar in that it's very easy for us to self-deprecate, but you did very well, and you will continue to get better the more you can practice. But you're absolutely right. You go to the best artists that you can get to. Don't mess around with mediocre teachers. There are a lot of them out there. You pick very carefully the ones you spend your time with, and do it with a lot of different ones. Don't just get hung up on one teacher, because you'll just end up trying to paint like him or her, and that's not really the goal of an artist. The goal of an artist is to find his own voice. But the technical aspects of picking up paint and putting it down, and how to see and how to organize and how to compose and all of those things, how to just deal with the difficulty of being outdoors, all of those things, equipment, and, all of those things start falling into place, and every little bit helps you to better work, as you gradually put the pieces together in your own way, in your own fashion. And eventually, you get enough skills that you can sort of say, okay, I'm not painting like anybody, I'm painting like me, and I'm going to continue to pursue my own vision. But you've got the background skills with which to work, and pretty important. And so, yes, you're doing it exactly right, Carl, and I was impressed by your focus, your intention, and your skills. And you're going to do well if you can find time to paint.
Well, I'm going to keep working at that. I appreciate that. I appreciate the. I think sometimes teaching is not so much about just the technique, but the coaching. And so when I hear things like that, it's encouraging to me. So
well, I did teach, for quite a long time myself, and after I felt that I had mastered some skills enough to presume to teach, which for a while you just don't believe you're good enough, but. When people started asking me and other artists started encouraging me to get into the workshop thing for a while, I did, because I had studied with Clyde and I had studied with Skip and Lynn and so many of these great painters who were giving their time, not giving because they were earning good money to do so, but it's always a distraction from your own work in your own studio and, to some extent. But I started teaching, and I found that I was actually quite a good teacher.
And I would agree with that.
People enjoyed my workshops, and they came back and they complimented me. And part of that, I think, had to do with the fact that I'm a gentle critiquer. In other words, I try to give people, that spoonful of sugar before I hit them with reality. But
yes, we all have fragile egos, so we need that.
Oh, don't we? Yes, and I don't care who you are. Nobody likes a bad critique, especially one that doesn't have any compassion built into it.
Right.
And when you get those, they may be very valuable, but they're hard to swallow. So, but anyway, and I did that for 10 years, and so I did reach a point, where I decided that the time it took for me to get ready for and travel to and do a workshop, take 2 weeks or more to do a 5-day workshop out of my own demanding schedule, that I decided it was time for me to work on my own work. And so I did drop out of the teaching until this one that we just did, because Matt tapped me and said, I need you to come do this with us for when we Papa did the one at the Booth Museum there recently, where I met you, and that was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed doing it, and I had sort of forgotten how much I enjoyed talking to people about art and helping them, because the pleasure of seeing some lights go on when people are working and doing something that maybe they didn't realize they could do with a little guidance is a real joy, and it reminds me of how much and how important my teachers were to me in getting over those early humps.
If I had not known that you had not taught, I think you said 10 years or so, I would have never known. I mean, it's just like you picked up and just picked up where you left, as if it were yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I guess those principles are firmly founded within you and in your heart and your care of people and the students it comes through. So that I was very happy that I made the choice that I did. But I want to back up just a little bit and tell folks who are listening to this for the first time, the way this came about is Papa, the Plein Painters of America, did this workshop at the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville. This is I have no affiliation with the Booth Museum. I just love the Booth Museum. There's nothing like it in the Southeast, or at least that I'm aware of. There may be other places, I don't know, but this is it's a great museum. But not only that, it's an education center. And when I saw this event come up, I said, I got to do this. I mean, as soon as I heard it, I called up Kent Mullinex and said, yeah, here's my credit card. I think I must have been the first person to sign up for it, and he said, well, who are you going to pick? And that was the hard part.
Yeah, you had some tough choices, and I'm really pleased you chose me, because I don't think I filled mine up quite as quickly as some of the other guys did. But regardless,
but it was an easy decision. But yeah, I would have loved to have taken classes from the others. Each one, but in effect, we all did learn from all the instructors. There were some great lectures and discussions, as well as one-on-one, which I enjoyed. I remember I was signed up to your class and Matt's class, and that was a great combo. But I was out on Lake Allatoona here in Georgia, struggling over a scene with water, and here comes Lynn Schmill up. No one's around. He says, I know you're not in my class, and I'm not supposed to do this, but can I tell you something? I said, sure. I'm not going to pass that up for $1 million,
And I'll tell you, Lynn is one who doesn't pass out compliments easily. He's a fellow you've got to earn his attention, and I enjoy watching Lynn when he's in a gallery or at a show, because he's so intensely looks at things. He doesn't just walk by and glance. He stops in front of every painting and studies it. And he doesn't want anybody with him. He doesn't want to talk about it. He just wants to look at them and absorb and define for himself whether or not the artist was successful in doing what he was intending to do and how he did it or why he did it. Lynn is a pretty good close friend of mine, and he lives not too far away, and we've spent a lot of good time together, and he's been a great source of learning for me. But he doesn't freely offer critique. He doesn't walk into your studio and start criticizing your work or talking about it. You have to ask for it. And if you do, you better get ready to hear the truth.
Yeah. Well, I didn't ask for it. He just come up and said, can I show you something?
Well, sure. I mean, that was a more generous than usual offer on his part, and I thought that's great to hear that he was open to that for you. But that's just the nature of art and artists. We love art, and we love talking about it, and so it doesn't surprise me that much that he offered an opinion to you, because it makes us feel good to know that we have something to offer. And of course, that's why we teach in the first place.
Well, I don't remember the mission statement for Papa, but if I remember correctly, it really had to do a lot with education. And that came through in the workshop.
And that's why we've tried to keep ourselves a little bit separate from the other plein air groups in America, because we've wanted to try to educate people about plein air as a process and not as an end in itself. And so we in an attempt to be different, we almost fell off the map because people were so busy chasing all these other shows, and we weren't doing a wet painting show for years. So we kind of lost our visibility, and until this last year or so, when Matt stepped up and said to take over control of the group as president, and then immediately tapped me as secretary treasurer, which means I get to do all the hard work.
You poor man.
But of course, I couldn't turn Matt down because we were all concerned. We were all concerned about, all of us older guys were concerned about what appeared to be the imminent demise of Papa, and we didn't want to see that happen. So we're trying really hard to bring it back to the forefront, and we brought in some really great young new artists who we needed to bring the fresh blood into our group because it was aging without a doubt. And we got some really great new artists and as members, and we feel like we've got a vibrant future. And Matt is busily developing more and new venues and opportunities for the group, and to both show and sell and teach. So, but teaching is a big part of it because that does, of course, fund some of our group activities. So that's how we generate some income for the group activities. Like we'll be gathering in Glacier National Park the last week of September for a group pop-up paint out, which will be really fun because we're all there just to the camaraderie, as you say, and the painting is part of the reason why we enjoy being part of a group like that.
Well, that sounds beautiful. So back to your studio and to your work. What are some of the motifs that you look forward to developing in some of your future works? Do you see yourself moving to what type of subject matters do you see yourself developing as you go forward?
One reason I made a joke about how not to run an art career is that I've always been a little hard to pin down. I have changed my subject matter. I've changed my media. I've changed my techniques. I'm not one that's easy to market because I don't fit a niche very consistently, and I seem to have an aversion to fitting anybody's niche. And as soon as they think they got me pigeonholed, I'm going to squirm them away and do something else. Right? Don't pin me down.
What excites you in developing new works of art?
I do tend to change my enthusiasm, and of course, the big game wildlife has stayed as maybe my mainstay, along with the pure landscapes that I do. But I've been probably a little more driven recently in the pure landscape, the mountain landscape. Recently, the idea of painting more glacial-oriented mountain country has come to me. I was fortunate to travel to Nepal in 2010 and do a over 200-mile trek, 35 days hiking and camping around the 8th highest mountain in the world, and for the first time see those 25 to 27,000 foot mountains. Totally glacial clad, and then my wife and I have made a couple of trips to Switzerland and Chamonix, France areas where I got to see the Alps and the glaciers that are fading so quickly there, along with, of course, the knowledge that the glaciers, that the few small glaciers that were still in North America, or I should say in the 48 states, have virtually disappeared, and Canada and Alaska, although they still have quite a lot of ice, it's also fading fast. So I kind of got a bug for the idea of recording the thing that's passing, and our artists have often done that. The guys that were painting cowboys in their heyday, knowing that they wouldn't last forever, and painting mountain men, knowing that they wouldn't last forever. The early artists always tend to record reality or what's happening today, knowing it may not be the same tomorrow, and to try to record some some things for posterity. And so at this late stage in my career, I kind of got this bug to paint more glaciers. I did a few pieces that were received quite well, having won the California Art Club's gold medal with my piece called Icefall.
Nice.
A few years ago, and I've done a number of other pieces glacially oriented. That seems to be the thing I want to pursue the most, which of course is what the trip to the Bugaboos is about, and many other trips I've done to Alaska and Canada, and so it's part of my future enthusiasm right now is to do more with that subject matter.
Very good. You know, you joked at the very beginning about making a living as an artist is not easy, and I've got to ask you, what were you thinking when you when you made this decision?
I wasn't. I was 20 years old. And I was having too much fun to bother thinking about it. It was about for me. It was about the freedom of the life, to be able to do the things that I love to do, and I don't know. I got spoiled rather quickly at not having to work for somebody else. Admittedly, I wasn't an intellectual giant, and I had no idea how to run a business, and I was much too focused on having a good time than working hard. So it took me until my 30s to really start putting my nose to the grindstone, you know, and putting out the effort that I learned was necessary. You know, I got so many compliments as a kid and in school that I was so talented, and, you know, I expected the world to beat a path to my door. And so I sat around waiting for that, and it didn't happen. And I had to realize, wait a minute, I guess I have to do some work before they do that. Huh?
Yeah. I mean, you know, word of mouth only goes so far, unfortunately.
That's for sure.
And then you have to start marketing and all that good stuff. So, yeah. You know, I've always been project oriented, so it seems like I go through phases, and so now I'm wanting to learn how to paint, and I've been doing that for a while, and I enjoy it. But I'm older as well, and you know, what are your thoughts about getting started late in life? I know you started early, but I just kind of I remember asking. I did meet Clyde Aspivig one time, and I told him the same thing. I said, I'm just now getting started. And you know what he did? He just kind of looked at me and kind of laughed. Said, well, good luck with that, you know? So, okay.
Yeah, no, it's true.
All right.
I'm not surprised because, you know, Clyde is one of those who started young and worked hard at it. Yeah. And his earliest paintings, you would not believe he is as successful as he is today if you look at the things he first started doing when he started.
Yeah. And I'm not putting him down for responding that way.
No. I know that, but I also know Clyde is a rather dry and cynical. Not really cynical isn't the word, but he certainly is very driven and very clear-minded about what it takes to be a painter, and studies that, and has obviously run his art career extremely well and worked very, very hard at developing his work to a level that it is. The whole idea of painting and art is it should be a joyful experience to express yourself and try to tell people about your joy of seeing something.
Sure.
And all of that is the beautiful aspect, one of the beautiful aspects of being an artist, not just the freedom, but the freedom to say what you want to say and tell people and draw their attention to things that you feel are beautiful. And so we're doing a little service to mankind, if you will, that is pretty harmless, because all we're doing is trying to say, gosh, look at this. Isn't it wonderful? You know, and, you know, so it's to start late in life as a retirement, if you will, is, I think, wonderful for folks to be able to take the time finally to pursue an interest that they may have had all their life but just couldn't pursue due to the realities of family and responsibilities. And, you know, I can say that one reason why I succeeded as an artist is that I knew how to avoid responsibility totally. I never had children of my own. I am very happy to have 2 stepdaughters and 4 step-grandchildren, but when it mattered most, I did not have children, so that allowed me to maintain the freedom necessary to focus on being an artist and do so obviously on an extremely limited budget. So, because I knew I couldn't afford to be a father at that point. And but to again, as a retirement hobby or starting in as a hobbyist late in life, there's absolutely no negativity to that. It's an opportunity to do something you've always wanted to do, and to find joy and enjoyment in doing it. You don't have to look at it as a profession. You don't have to look at it as income.
Yeah.
You get to look at it strictly as the joy of creating, and that should be part of it, whether you're making a living at it or not. And so many times I've said to myself, boy, I wish I had money in the bank that I'd earned before so that I could afford to do this. But I'm still doing it, and but I encourage anybody who has the desire to pursue it strictly from the idea of having a good time and doing something you want to do. And don't, like you say, compare yourself to others. You can't do that. It's self-defeating. Yes, there's always somebody better than you, no matter how good you are. Clyde Revere's Emil Carlson, and everybody has a hero, no matter who you are. So, or 2 or 3 or 4 or a dozen. So, but do it because you love it. That's the main reason.
Yes. Where's the best place for people to learn about you and to see some of your work?
Well, I have an old website which badly needs renovated and updated, and keep threatening to build a new one, but I'm somewhat technologically challenged and certainly time challenged, and I never seem to get around to it. But it's quite complete, and it's been out there for many years. And so, although when I say updating is always an issue, but there's a lot of information about my career there if you want to dig through a very complicated site. I've been fortunate to have an awful lot of good magazine reprepresentation, Art of the West, Southwest Art, Western Art Collector. I've had many articles, and those people have been very generous to me and given me great exposure, and that really helped my career quite a lot. So those can be found. My primary galleries, Trailside, Jackson, Wood River Fine Arts, and Ketchum, Idaho. Sue Simpson's Simpson Gallagher Gallery in Cody, Wyoming. Michael Paderewski's gallery in Beaver Creek, Colorado are my primary gallery outlets. I've been fortunate to show in many of the major shows in the country, and that's who I am, where I am.
All right. I just, your website is ralphoberg.com. I'll provide a link for that. So, Ralph, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you on the Artful Painter podcast.
It's been fun for me too, Carl. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm very grateful to Ralph Oberg for taking the time to talk with me and allowing me to share this conversation with you. He's a truly gracious man. I discovered that when I attended his workshop several months ago at the Booth Museum. He was very kind to me. He was very encouraging and very informative. The instruction that I received from him will last me a lifetime, that's for sure. He's kindly allowed me to post a few of his images of his latest paintings on my website. So if you go to artfulpainter.com, you can see a few of those there. And by the way, while you are there at my website, artfulpainter.com, register to receive updates and alerts for future episodes of The Artful Painter. That way you won't miss anything. There's more to come in this show. In fact, in the very next episode, I speak with artist Matt Smith. The Artful Painter is available in, wherever you can find shows like this, such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and elsewhere. Remember to subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode. And I have one other favor to ask. please help get the word out about this show. It's brand new. It's just getting started. So your efforts to spread the word about the Artful Painter is very much appreciated. Thank you for listening to the Artful Painter. It's your turn. Go out there and paint something amazing.
Picture on the TV.